We talk a lot about bias in algorithms, the way in which algorithms can be racist, the way in which algorithms can be sexist, and other sort of prejudices. But you don't always hear a lot about how algorithms are ableist and the way in which these algorithms discriminate against people with disabilities. And this is where I'll point out that if you live long enough, you will be disabled. Right? The status of disability, while rigidly and narrowly defined by governments, is actually a universal condition that almost all humans will experience if they live long enough. Right? And so that's why, just like racism, just like sexism, just like homophobia, ableism is something that we should all be fighting against, that we should all be outraged and speaking against, because we are all either currently disabled or we will be disabled. And I'm not being facetious on that point, but here's the headline or the news hook that kind of triggers this story. And it turns out that Facebook and Instagram are rejecting advertisements that serve people with disabilities. And of course, it's another one of those stories of an automated intelligence system not understanding the context in which the media or imagery of the ads are taking place, and are misclassifying it or miscategorizing it and therefore rejecting the ads. And while this is modest in the sense that it's just preventing someone from putting forward an ad, and because Facebook does provide a remarkable amount of tech support for their advertisers, that these people who want to give Facebook money, Facebook ends up finding a way for them to give them that money and finding a way for them to place the ad in the end. But it's indicative of all the instances in which people are not placing an ad and therefore don't get access to the same level of commercial support. So, that's why I think we need to look at these types of instances of how Facebook and Instagram are discriminating against people with disabilities, so that we can point out the kind of measures, and in this case, the kind of penalties that Facebook and Instagram should be subject to. And so in this case, it's really talking about the way in which, Facebook, and I'll get to the analysis here, it was rejected for violating policy, specifically the promotion of medical and healthcare products and services, including medical devices. And though it included no such products, the issue is that if it sees somebody in a wheelchair, if it sees somebody, that could be depicted as involving or having a relationship with an assistive device, then it automatically puts it in the category of verboten, of being a regulated ad product rather than a normal ad product. And it points out that Mighty Well's experience is an example of a pattern that's been going on for years. That algorithms, as the gatekeepers to Facebook's ad system, routinely misidentify adaptive fashion products and block them from their platforms. At least 6 other small adaptive clothing companies have experienced the same problems. One brand has been dealing with the issue on a weekly basis. Another has had hundreds of products rejected. In each instance, the company has had to appeal each case on an item-by-item basis. And that's where I'll point out that it's only because they're advertisers that they get the ability to appeal it, right? If you're just a user, you're kind of shit out of luck. And that's part of the rub of ableism, in terms of it doesn't have the visibility, it doesn't have the profile, it doesn't have the same kind of moral weight as some of the other biases. And I think that's why it deserves greater attention and greater visibility. To continue reading, at a time when the importance of representation is at the center of the cultural conversation, when companies everywhere are publicly trumpeting their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and systemic change, and when a technology company like Facebook is under extra deep scrutiny for the way in which its policies can shape society at large, the adaptive fashion struggle reflects a bigger issue. That the implicit biases embedded in machine learning and the way they impact marginalized communities. And, the reason I wanted to talk about ableist algorithms in particular is it sort of teases out the paradox of bias in algorithms. That there's no such thing as an unbiased algorithm, right? There's no such thing as an unbiased human being. The nature of the subjective experience is that we are biased. But that doesn't mean that we have to be assholes or bigots, right? That doesn't mean that our bias has to be ableism. Our bias could be anti-ableism, i.e. inclusivity. Our bias instead of racism could be anti-racism. Our bias instead of fascism could be anti-fascism. In that it's still a bias, but it's a conscious counter bias against something that to a great organization called We Count. And We Count focuses on inclusive design and inclusive technology, and they're trying to create what they call an inclusive data ecosystem. And in creating an inclusive data ecosystem, it really affords not just greater inclusivity, but greater participation. Because it recognizes that if you're going to build technology for people with disabilities, then those people with disabilities need to be involved in the design and manufacture of that technology. And so if you scale that up to society, if we're going to have social media that reflects universal values, that is inclusive and reflects all of us, then we all need to participate. And that's the idea of an inclusive data ecosystem. And so I want to play this video to sort of illustrate that point.
We Count, a project of the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University, was created to address barriers to participation and employment for persons with disabilities within data science and data-driven systems. As data becomes the main source for truth and value, persons with disabilities are becoming increasingly marginalized because their needs are not considered within the data ecosystem. Many systems are designed for the cluster of people at the center. For those people, the design works well. As we move away from the center, the design becomes more difficult for people to use and may even be unusable. We Count addresses barriers throughout the data ecosystem. A data ecosystem is the complete cycle of pieces of information, as well as individuals and organizations within that system. This cycle includes individuals who generate data or information, systems that collect and analyze the data, individuals who build or use the systems, collecting, analyzing, visualizing, and generating insights from data, and the decisions made from this process, and training, hiring, and working within data science fields. The goal of We Count is to create an inclusive and balanced data ecosystem for persons with disabilities and others who are excluded. A data ecosystem that increases participation, addresses exclusion and bias, ensures community input, increases employment, and decreases vulnerability to data abuse and misuse. To achieve a fair data ecosystem, We Count is focused on sharing current views in inclusive data science, gathering resources, data sets, and inclusive data tools, and involving the community through design challenges, workshops, and events. As the data ecosystem continues to evolve, We Count is working closely with the disability community and our established network of partners to identify and solve key accessibility challenges. To learn more about We Count, visit our website or follow us on social media. We Count is funded by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation.
So, I mean, I definitely encourage you guys to check out We Count on Twitter. They post a lot of good stuff and really talk about a lot of interesting issues. And, you know, I wanted to bring up the kind of ableist algorithms and the ableist bias embedded in technology, because I do think it's going to be an active, persistent thread because it's relevant in a pandemic, but it's also where a lot of these companies see an opportunity. You know, Danger Darren posted an interesting comment in the chat about how he's been laid up since yesterday with a back injury, and usually Amazon is right there with product suggestions, but nothing relevant so far. Which, on the one hand, is hilarious. I mean, tragic. I'm sorry that you hurt your back. That really sucks. I hope you're able to rest up and chill and heal. But it is funny how we almost have these expectations that the algorithm is going to anticipate those needs. And on the one hand, you almost want a little bit of that nursing, right? You almost want a little bit of that care. But I can also sense in the back of your head, you're also like kind of glad that it wasn't able to, you know, be able to read your changed state, that it wasn't able to read the gyrometer on your smartphone and tell that you were a little more laid back or moving a little more slowly, or using the microphone to hear you groan in terms of knowing that you have back pain. So, you know, it is a bit of a paradox where we anticipate the desire of having this technology help us and support us, but we also recognize the trade-off. We recognize the slippery slope that offers. You know, Hare LeClaire is reminding me of an anecdote that Jutta Trevenarius, who is one of the leaders behind WeCount, she talked about some research she did with self-driving vehicles in which you know, the self-driving vehicle had a machine learning model of how to navigate an urban environment. And Jutta added someone in a wheelchair to this virtual environment. And the self-driving vehicle ran right over, killed the person in the wheelchair because it didn't know what a wheelchair was. It had never seen one before. And so because it didn't recognize it, it didn't see it as a threat, it didn't break, it kept moving. So, of course, the designers of the machine learning program were shocked. They're like, oh, well, you know, that only happened because it was the first time it's seen it. It was an error. We'll just program it in. We'll just put in exactly, you know, what a wheelchair is. So a couple weeks later, after the machine learning model had time to be able to run and learn what a wheelchair was, Jutta came back and, you know, they put the wheelchair in, and the car ran over the wheelchair again. And so the developers were frustrated. They were shocked. They didn't understand why the machine learning model had the self-driving car run over the wheelchair. And it was because Jutta had the wheelchair go in reverse. Because what Jutta knew from her anthropological research is that when someone is self-propelling themselves in a wheelchair, i.e. when they don't have someone pushing them, they tend to use their legs to push the wheelchair in reverse. And because the machine learning model assumed that the wheelchair only went in one direction, right? It misjudged the situation by thinking that the wheelchair had left the intersection when in fact the wheelchair had entered the intersection because it couldn't realize that the person was operating it in reverse. So it's that kind of human nuance, right? That can be lost on a machine that a human driver in theory could recognize exactly what's going on, but a self-driving car, until it's exposed to that phenomena repeatedly, it's really difficult to be able to pick up those types of learning. So, you know, it's kind of scary, but it very powerfully illustrates how we need diverse and inclusive and participatory data.